Somewhere, right now, someone is falling in love for the first time. Their pulse is climbing. Their thoughts are looping around one single person. And their brain, in that exact moment, looks almost identical to the brain of someone who just took a hit of cocaine. That's not a metaphor. It's a measurable fact, sitting in brain scans taken decades apart, on opposite sides of the world. The real answer to why falling in love feels the way it does isn't romantic at all. It's chemical, ancient, and far stranger than anything a love song ever prepared you for. Your brain was never designed to make you happy. It was designed to make you survive, and more specifically, to make you reproduce. Falling in love is one of the most powerful tools it has for accomplishing that goal, and it will hijack nearly every system you have to do it. In the late 1990s, an anthropologist named Helen Fisher wanted to know what was actually happening inside the brains of people who had just fallen in love. So, she did something almost nobody had done before. She put newly infatuated people into an fMRI scanner, showed them a photo of the person they loved, and watched their brain activity light up in real time. What she found reshaped how scientists talk about love entirely. The region that lit up most powerfully wasn't some poetic center for emotion. It was the ventral tegmental area, a small cluster of cells buried deep in the primitive part of the brain, a region associated almost entirely with motivation, drive, and reward. This is the same region that activates when someone uses cocaine, not a similar region. The same one. Why would falling in love and using a stimulant drug trigger the exact same neural circuitry? Because at a biological level, they're doing almost the same job. Both flood your brain with dopamine, the chemical responsible for wanting, craving, and pursuing a reward with single-minded focus. When Fisher's participants looked at a photo of the person they loved, their brains didn't just feel pleasure. They felt drive, a pull, an urge to seek out and be near that one specific person above almost anything else. This is why new love feels less like calm contentment and more like obsession. You're not imagining the intensity. Your brain, quite literally, has classified this person as a reward worth chasing at almost any cost, using the same neural pathway your ancestors used to chase food when they were starving. Think about what that means for how you experience someone new. That person you can't stop thinking about? Your brain isn't just enjoying their presence, it's craving it, the way it might crave a substance. And that craving comes with side effects that mirror addiction almost point for point. Consider the symptoms: difficulty concentrating on anything else, loss of appetite, disrupted sleep, euphoria when you're with them, restlessness when you're not. Fisher noted that these aren't quirks of romantic personality, they're the textbook signs of a dopamine-driven motivational state, the same state that governs substance dependence. Your body isn't being dramatic, it's running an ancient program exactly as designed. But dopamine is only half of the story. There's a second chemical shift happening at the same time, one that's arguably even stranger. In the late 1990s, an Italian psychiatrist named Donatella Marazziti ran a study comparing the blood serotonin levels of people who had recently fallen in love to the blood serotonin levels of people diagnosed with obsessive-compulsive disorder. She expected some overlap. What she found was a near match. Newly in love participants showed serotonin levels dramatically lower than average, statistically indistinguishable from people in the middle of an active OCD episode. Let that sit for a moment. The intrusive thoughts. The inability to stop replaying a conversation. The compulsive need to check your phone for a reply. These aren't just romantic cliques you've heard in movies. They're a measurable biochemical state, one your brain shares with clinical obsession. When you can't stop thinking about someone new, your brain isn't malfunctioning. It's running exactly the chemistry Marazziti's data predicted it would. This raises an uncomfortable question. If new love resembles both addiction and obsessive-compulsive disorder at a chemical level, why would evolution ever build something so disruptive? Because disruption is exactly the point. Mating, in evolutionary terms, is expensive. It requires overriding caution, overriding logic, overriding the normal instinct to protect your resources and your safety. A brain state that quietly nudges you toward a potential partner wouldn't be strong enough to make that override happen. Evolution needed something closer to a takeover. Obsessive focus. Reduced impulse control around one specific person. A reward system practically screaming at you to pursue them. That's not a flaw in the system. That is the system, working exactly as intended. There's a third player in this story, and it's the one most people have actually heard of, even if they don't fully understand it. Oxytocin, often nicknamed the bonding hormone, floods your system during physical closeness, eye contact, and touch. Unlike the frantic energy of dopamine or the obsessive tint of low serotonin, oxytocin does something calmer. It builds attachment. It's the chemical reason a hug from someone you love feels different from a hug from a stranger. And it plays a critical role in transforming early infatuation into something more durable. Here's where the story gets genuinely interesting. These three systems don't all activate at once, and they don't all last the same amount of time. The dopamine-driven craving phase, the one that feels like obsession, the one Fisher's scans lit up so vividly, tends to burn hottest in the first few months of a relationship. Researchers studying this window have found that the most intense infatuation effects typically begin fading somewhere between 12 and 18 months in, not because love is disappearing, but because your brain simply cannot sustain that level of chemical intensity indefinitely. No system built for constant high alert stays at full activation forever. It would be metabolically catastrophic. This is the part almost nobody warns you about. That fading isn't your love failing. It's your brain transitioning from one system to another, a slower, steadier one built on oxytocin and vasopressin rather than dopamine and disrupted serotonin. Long-term couples studied years into their relationships still show heightened activity in reward regions when looking at a partner's photo. But the pattern shifts. The frantic craving softens. What remains looks more like deep attachment than obsession, calmer but in some ways more resilient. Understanding this timeline changes how you might interpret a relationship that seems to lose its initial spark. That spark was never meant to be permanent. It was a launch mechanism, not a fuel source for the entire journey. The couples who make it past that 18-month mark aren't the ones who kept the obsession alive. They're the ones whose brains successfully transitioned into the second, quieter system. So why does falling in love feel so specifically tied to one person rather than a general glow of happiness? This is where a psychologist named Arthur Aaron enters the story. In the 1990s, Aaron ran an experiment that's become one of the most famous studies in relationship science. Though most people know it today by a different name, the 36 questions that lead to love. Aaron paired strangers together and had them work through a series of increasingly personal questions, followed by 4 minutes of sustained, uninterrupted eye contact. The goal wasn't romance specifically. It was testing something called the self-expansion model. The idea that closeness forms when two people rapidly and mutually reveal themselves to each other, expanding each person's sense of who they are by merging it, even briefly, with someone else's. What Aaron found was striking. Participants who went through this structured vulnerability reported significantly higher closeness than pairs who engaged in small talk for the same amount of time. Some participants in his original studies even went on to marry each other. The mechanism wasn't magic. It was structure. Deep, mutual vulnerability, delivered quickly and reciprocally, accelerated a bonding process that might otherwise take months. This tells you something important about what falling in love actually requires. It isn't randomly assigned by fate to one uniquely compatible soul. It's a process your brain runs whenever specific conditions are met: novelty, vulnerability, sustained attention, and reciprocity. Aaron's research suggests those ingredients can be engineered, at least partially, which is both less romantic and somehow more remarkable than the idea of destiny. Now think about your own life. And how many of the moments people describe as falling in love actually match this pattern? A long late-night conversation with someone new. A shared adrenaline experience, like a roller coaster, a scary movie, or a stressful trip. extended eye contact you didn't expect to happen. These aren't coincidences. They're the exact conditions Fisher's dopamine research and Aaron's closeness research both point to as triggers for the cascade. There's a well-documented phenomenon researchers call misattribution of arousal, first studied through a famous experiment involving a wobbly suspension bridge. Men who crossed a frightening, unstable bridge and then met an attractive researcher on the other side were significantly more likely to later contact her than men who crossed a stable, low bridge and met the same researcher. Their bodies were already in a state of physiological arousal, elevated heart rate, quickened breath, and their brains needing an explanation for that arousal. Partly attributed it to attraction rather than fear. Your brain isn't always precise about labeling why your heart is racing. Sometimes it just guesses, and sometimes it guesses romance. This is why intense or unusual shared experiences so often accelerate connection. It's not that adrenaline creates love out of nothing. It's that adrenaline creates the exact physiological conditions your brain is primed to interpret as the beginning of it. Put all of this together, and falling in love stops looking like a mystery and starts looking like a very specific, very traceable neurological sequence. Dopamine surges through your reward circuitry, creating craving and motivation. Serotonin drops, producing obsessive, looping focus on one person. Oxytocin builds quietly in the background, laying the groundwork for attachment that will outlast the initial intensity. Arousal, whether from vulnerability, novelty, or actual physical adrenaline, gets partially mislabeled by your brain as romantic feeling. And the entire system, however overwhelming it feels from the inside, exists because it once solved an extremely old evolutionary problem: get two people close enough, focused enough on each other, for long enough to form a bond capable of surviving the enormous cost of raising offspring together. None of this makes love less real. If anything, it makes it more impressive. You're not simply feeling an emotion. You're experiencing the coordinated output of multiple ancient neural systems evolved over millions of years, each one doing its job with startling precision, all firing at once because your brain has, for reasons rooted in survival rather than sentiment, decided this particular person matters. This also explains something that trips a lot of people up. The person you fall for isn't always the person who's objectively best for you in the long run. Fisher's research and later work built on it suggests the initial dopamine-driven attraction system and the longer-term attachment system aren't always perfectly aligned. You can feel intense chemical pull toward someone your slower, more deliberate reasoning would never choose. That mismatch isn't a character flaw. It's two different neurological systems, evolved for two different timescales, occasionally sending you conflicting signals. Knowing this doesn't make the feeling any less powerful the next time it happens to you, but it does change what you're looking at while it's happening. The racing heart. The inability to stop checking your phone. The way one person's face seems to matter more than anything else in the room. That's not fate whispering in your ear. It's dopamine, dropped serotonin, rising oxytocin, and a brain doing exactly what evolution spent millions of years teaching it to do, all compressed into a feeling so intense that humans have spent thousands of years writing poems about it without ever quite naming what it actually was. Somewhere, right now, someone else is falling in love for the first time. Their brain is lighting up the same way a brain lights up on a drug. And for the first time, maybe you know exactly why.